Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 240. Thank you for tuning in. Guys, did you watch that DNC in Chicago? What a spectacle. Star-studded spectacle. I don't have any clips from the DNC that I'm going to play. There were a lot of lies that they told, a lot of continuing the sugar high that we've been seeing, the phenomenon of the Kamala Harris campaign, the Kamala Harris phenomenon, I guess you can call it. And there was a lot more of that at the DNC. And boy, did they tell some whoppers and continue lying and gaslighting the country. I have a really good podcast for you guys today. I have so much. We're probably not going to get through all this stuff in this podcast, so we'll probably pick it up again on Monday. But one of the first things I want to talk about today that I think is a really significant event is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Suspending his campaign and endorsing Donald Trump. This just happened about an hour ago. I want you to listen to a little bit of what Robert F. Kennedy says here in this speech where he suspends his campaign.
Lacking confidence in its candidate, that its candidate could win in a fair election at the voting booth, the DNC waged continual legal warfare against both President Trump and myself. Each time that our volunteers turned in those towering boxes of signatures needed to get on the ballot, the DNC dragged us into court, state after state, attempting to erase their work and to subvert the will of the voters who had signed those petitions. It deployed DNC-aligned judges to throw me and other candidates off the ballot and to throw President Trump in jail. It ran a sham primary that was rigged to prevent any serious challenge to President Biden.
Absolutely.
Then, when a predictably bungled debate performance precipitated the palace coup against President Biden, the same shadowy DNC operatives appointed his successor, also without an election.
Who's he talking? He's talking about Kamala Harris there. Same shadowy DNC, the elite. The elite. This didn't come from the people. It came from the elite is what he said. That they first rigged it to not have a fair primary. They didn't allow him to run against Biden the way he wanted to, the way his uncle ran against Jimmy Carter in 1980 and hurt Jimmy Carter. That's the last thing that they wanted, a repeat of RFK running against Joe Biden and hurting Joe Biden. So they didn't allow him to do the primary. It was totally rigged. They used the legal system and their team of justice, or he says judges here, Democrat aligned judges, but they have teams of lawyers. The DNC does in every state. So in every state where he tried to get on the ballot, they were fighting him in court. And then he says DNC aligned judges kicked him off. It wasn't fair at all. Completely unfair is the complaint he's making. And he says that the DNC is not a fair Democratic Party. And that's why he left the Democratic Party and why he's suspending his campaign now and voting for Trump. There's a lot in this speech. I recommend watching the entire speech because it's really good. But I think it's really significant. Yesterday it was the last day of the DNC, and there was all of this hype going around about a special guest at the DNC. It says right here, this is Don Lemon, formerly of CNN. If you don't remember who Don Lemon is, he does a podcast now. He's trying to, be a content creator and to to get his name out and get his show going. His content is not good at all. But he builds it around controversy. I have another clip of some of his content that we're going to look at here in a moment. But yesterday, I don't know if this came from the DNC, someone there at the DNC, but there began to be a rumor to be floated around that there was a special guest. It's the last night of the DNC. There's going to be a special guest. They were saying, who's it going to be? Is it going to be Beyoncé? Is it going to be Taylor Swift? Who's it going to be? And everybody was predicting it was going to be Beyoncé. There's some accusations that the DNC put out the rumor that Beyoncé was going to be at the DNC last night to get the ratings up for Kamala Harris's speech. But Don Lemon was the first person that I saw make this speculation. And he doesn't say only Beyoncé. He doesn't only say Taylor Swift. There's another name that Don Lemon floats here. Take a listen.
I'm sure you guys have read all the headlines, all the stuff on social media about who's going to be at the DNC. Is it going to be Beyoncé? Is it going to be Taylor Swift? Here's what I hear from sources. If it's going to be anyone, it would be Beyoncé, Taylor Swift, and George W. Bush speaking. Those would be the heavy hitters. And it could happen. I'm just saying.
And it could happen. I'm just saying. Well, it didn't happen. This guy's got egg all over his face now because he shamed himself coming out telling people that Beyoncé, Taylor Swift, or George W. Bush. Now, that's significant. That George W. Bush is significant. There are a lot of people speculating that it could be George W. Bush, that George W. Bush was going to show up at the DNC last night and endorse Kamala Harris. Now, when I heard that yesterday, I got excited. I was really hoping that was the special guest. I don't care about Beyoncé. I don't care about Taylor Swift, but it would have been really interesting if George W. Bush would have shown up. Now, when this rumor started going around, first started by Don Lemon here, everybody started talking about it. And the fact that George W. Bush was going to be, well, not a fact because it didn't happen, but the idea of George W. Bush being at the DNC endorsing Kamala Harris, that didn't surprise anyone. No one said like, oh, I can't believe that George W. Bush would do this. There were a lot of people saying, who cares what George W. Bush says, nobody, he's not relevant anymore, especially in the Republican Party. But nobody was surprised. Nobody was saying, that I would be surprised if George W. Bush showed up. Everyone would say, everyone was saying that it would be fitting if George W. Bush showed up. It would absolutely be fitting. Obama was there. Bill Clinton was there. You can say, well, maybe, those are two former Democratic presidents that you're not surprised that Bill Clinton was there, that Obama was there, but for a Republican president to show up at the DNC, that would be pretty surprising. I mean, why wouldn't he be at the RNC endorsing Donald Trump? Because it's no secret that this guy, George Bush, doesn't like Donald Trump. He doesn't like Donald Trump at all. He would never show up to the RNC and endorse Donald Trump. He wouldn't be welcome at the RNC. And that's something that I want to talk about real quick is that what RFK is talking about that happened to him in the DNC this year in 2024 is nothing new. I mean, this is what the DNC did to Bernie Sanders in 2016. It's what both parties did to Ralph Nader in 2000. So the way that the system works is the system is designed for there only to be two parties, and everybody knows and criticizes the two-party system. But what you got to understand is that the two-party system is the way that the elite have designed it, because they win no matter which party wins. I mean, they don't care anything about party allegiance. That's for us. We care about party allegiance, but the elite, they don't care about party allegiance. They support Democrats. They support Republicans. The D and the R means nothing for them. So if there's a populist movement that wants to take over the government and the controls of government from the establishment, the political establishment, you would have to take over one of the two political parties, because they've set it up to where a third party has no chance in the process. Someone like RFK had no chance to get ballot access on every single state, because both parties, and this time you have both parties fighting Donald Trump. Well, not Donald Trump controls the Republican Party now, but in 2016 you had the party establishment, the Republican Party establishment, fighting against Donald Trump. He ends up winning the nomination despite that. But Donald Trump was kind of running a third party campaign within the Republican Party. It's the same thing that Bernie Sanders was doing in 2016 in the Democratic Party. He was running a third party campaign within the Democratic Party, trying to take over the Democratic Party the same way that Trump took over the Republican Party. I don't know if Bernie Sanders was committed to it the same way that Trump was committed to it, because as soon as they cheated Bernie Sanders in 2016, the same way that they cheated RFK in this year, they did the same thing to Bernie Sanders in 2016. Bernie Sanders turns around and endorses Hillary Clinton. And so what I'm trying to explain to you is that you had two establishment parties in 2016. You had an outside group, the MAGA group on the right, trying to take over the Republican Party. And then you had left-wing populists with Bernie Sanders on the left, leading this left-wing populist progressive group that's trying to take over the Democratic Party and kick the Democratic establishment out. Now, in 2016, they used the superdelegates. Bernie Sanders would win a state like Michigan and other states that he won. Hillary Clinton would end up getting more delegates in that primary because of the superdelegates. Who are the superdelegates? Superdelegates were the party establishment, the party elite. They were the ones who were choosing Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders. So they were using the mechanisms within the party. We all remember the WikiLeaks dump that showed what's her name, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was the head of the Democratic Party in 2016, she having to step down because it's shown that they're rigging the primary against Bernie Sanders. Well, they changed the rules where they don't use the superdelegates anymore, but they use other measures to not allow Robert Kennedy to be competitive in a primary or to challenge Joe Biden competitively in a primary. So they rigged it in 2016 so this populist movement couldn't take over the Democratic Party. And then they're also rigging it in 2024 so Robert F. Kennedy doesn't have the opportunity to challenge Joe Biden. So that's his complaint. That's why he's leaving the race and endorsing Donald Trump. So these three guys represent 24 years of governance. These three guys right here. It's really interesting that you hear at the DNC too, all this week, they're talking about what Kamala Harris and Joe Biden inherited. This is what we inherited from Donald Trump. We inherited this economy. We inherited the pandemic and this crisis. We inherited the loss of jobs. That's what we inherited. But if we're going to be honest about what Kamala Harris and Joe Biden inherited, they inherited the 24 years that these guys gave Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, which preceded Donald Trump. 24 years, look, 24 years, 4 years, 4 years. 24 years, 4 years. So what they're telling you is that these are the 28 years that preceded Biden and Harris. 4 years and 28 years. Both of these guys spoke at the DNC too, and gave you all this fluff talk. Very little, policy. Especially Obama didn't talk anything about policy. It was just more of the sugar high and stuff, bashing Trump. But 24 years, 4 years. So what Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are telling you is that all of the problems that you are experiencing right now, all of the problems that you have with the economy, with not being able to afford anything, the 65% of the country believes that the country is on the wrong track. All of that is because of this guy and his 4 years, not the 24 years that preceded him. I mean, if it wasn't for the 24 years of these guys, this guy might not have ever been able to get elected for the 4 years that he served. But all of your problems is because of this guy's 4 years. And we're just going to forget about the 24 years of these guys. That's why I when I heard that George W. Bush was going to be at the DNC last night, I was excited. I was tickled because Obama was there on Tuesday night. Bill Clinton was there on Tuesday night, Obama on Wednesday night. It would have been fitting on Thursday night. Just go ahead and have George Bush there. These three clowns, because it would have been fitting if you understand what the role that these three guys played in creating the mess that we are in right now. 24 years, 4 years. It wasn't the 4 years of this guy that created the mess. They had a lot more to do with these guys. And then if you include this one too, that's 28 years. That's 28 years, because this is this guy's father right here. So this guy's father preceded this guy. So if you count his 4 years, that's 28 years, 4 years. 4 years, 28 years, if you include his father. Why I have this picture of George H.W. Bush here, because this is George H.W. Bush standing in front of the book depository on November 22nd, 1963. This is the day that Robert F. Kennedy's uncle was assassinated in Dallas. And you see this guy's father, this guy right here, his father is standing in front of the book depository. This is George H.W. Bush standing there. Now, he says he doesn't remember where he was that day, but we have a picture of him on that day standing in front of the book depository. This is what the book depository looks like today. But if you notice here, this is what it looks like in 1963. And you can see that that design that was in front of the windows. And you can see that same design behind George H.W. Bush here, where he's standing in front of the book depository in Dallas, Texas in 1963. So I just think that's significant. So let's talk about these guys and the 24 years, or if you want to include his father, the 28 years that preceded the 4 years of Donald Trump, which now Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are saying that these 4 years that they inherited for Donald Trump are why you have all of your problems. And these guys are speaking at the DNC endorsing Kamala Harris. These guys right here. I would have loved to if George Bush would have been there. But you may say, well, what? I mean, these are guys that are in different parties. Bill Clinton's a Democrat. Barack Obama's a Democrat. George Bush is a Republican. George Bush's father was a Republican president. What would these guys have in common? Well, these guys are cousins right here. This guy, Barack Obama and George Bush are cousins. He's also cousins. Barack Obama is cousins with George H.W. Bush. But what's the relationship with Bill Clinton? Well, take a look at this clip.
Your husband and Bill Clinton have become good friends.
That's right. My husband, Bill Clinton, and I have become great friends. And Bill
become great friends is what Barbara says. We've become. Well, when did y'all become great friends? Now, you ran against each other in 1992. Bill Clinton ran against George H.W. Bush. But I know for a fact that this relationship with George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton, their friendly relationship, started way before 1992. Now, don't Google Mena, Arkansas, Bill Clinton. Don't Google Mena, Arkansas, Barry Seal. But if you Google Mena, Arkansas, Bill Clinton, or Mena, Arkansas, Barry Seal, you might learn that this relationship, this friendship with Bill Clinton and George Bush at least began when Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas. I personally believe that this relationship that George H.W. Bush had with Bill Clinton preceded him being the governor of Arkansas and probably goes back to Bill Clinton's time in high school when he took a trip to Washington. And there's a picture of Bill Clinton in that trip of Washington and in Washington, just tying it all together. Let me just. This is a picture of a young Bill Clinton in Washington. And who's he shaking hands with right here? Shaking hands with this guy's uncle. So I believe that this relationship between George H.W. Bush and this guy, William Jefferson Clinton, goes back to this picture. And there's a number of reasons I believe that. I'm not going to get all into that. But when Barbara Bush says here, I don't want to show you that yet. But when Barbara Bush says here that Bill Clinton and I and George H.W. Bush have become good friends, when did they become good friends? Well, I'm telling you that their friendship, I know for a fact, goes back to when George H.W. Bush was vice president and Bill Clinton was the governor of Arkansas. But I believe it goes back even further than that.
Your husband and Bill Clinton have become good friends.
That's right. My husband, Bill Clinton, and I have become great friends. And Bill visits us every summer.
Every summer.
Bill's father wasn't around. And I think that he thinks of George a little bit like the father he didn't have.
A father figure, huh? A father figure. George H.W. Bush, this guy standing in front of the book depository in Daley Plaza on November 22nd, 1963, is like a father figure to William Jefferson Clinton. So that's why I say, if you're not going to only look at the 4 years of this guy, let's not only look at the 4 years of this guy, let's look at the 28 years of these three, including this guy, who's the father figure. So he's a father figure to this guy and the actual father of this guy. So that would make these two brothers, huh? That would make them brothers. Well, that's what they say. Take a listen.
And he's very, Bill's father wasn't around. And I think that he thinks of George a little bit like the father he didn't have.
Father.
And he's very loving to him.
Oh, they love each
and
other.
I really appreciate that.
My mother calls me my fourth brother. Calls him my fourth brother.
Is that right? The black sheep of the family.
May all the Democrats forgive me this close to the election. I love George Bush.
The black sheep of the family. Bill Clinton is the black sheep of the family. The fourth brother is what George says. So we got ourselves a little family going on here. That's what we got going on here. A little family going on here. 28 years we were governed by this family. And in 2016, this guy's wife was running. This guy's wife was running so they could just keep it going, keep the family thing going. It actually in 2016, this guy's brother was running and this guy's wife was running. What the establishment was going to try to do, they were going to try to hedge their bets, like I'm telling you, because they control both parties. They're going to try to hedge their bets. They wanted this guy's brother to represent the right, and then this guy's wife to represent the left. And they were going to have y'all feuding it out, the Bushes against the Clinton again until in 2016. And then whoever won was going to be a member of the family, either this guy's brother or this guy's wife. It's a family. So that's what they were running in 2016. But Bernie Sanders was leading a populist movement, left-wing, progressive populist movement on the left to take over the Democratic Party. And winning the nomination, they cheated him just like they cheated RFK this year. Donald Trump was running to a populist right-wing movement, the MAGA movement, to take over the Republican Party from the Republican establishment, from the Rockefeller Republicans like this guy and all of the Lincoln Project and all of these war hawk military-industrial complex Republicans, all the Republicans that are at the DNC crying, "Oh, I want my party back." Those guys are on the outs because Trump actually did what Bernie Sanders was not able to do on the left. Trump actually takes over the Republican Party, arrests the Republican Party from these Rockefeller Republicans. And now they're telling you that this guy's 4 years or why you got all your problems. This guy's 4 years. Let's not talk about the 28 years of this guy. So it's a little family tradition here. So we're still talking about Kamala Harris's economic proposals that she put out last week. Very little policy was discussed at this DNC, but we're going to get back into these policy proposals. I just want to recap some things that we talked about in the last podcast. The proposals consist of $25,000 down payment assistance, and then you have the $3 million or 3 million new housing units, and then the ban on corporate gouging, price fixing, and then there was another one to increase the child tax credit to $6,000, which is not original. She just raised it from JD Vance said $5,000 and she says $6,000. So I want to talk, probably not in this podcast. I'm just laying out some foundational things that I want to lay out. I want to recap some things that we talked about in the last podcast and clear some things up. So before the end of 2020, Democrats and Republicans were trying to negotiate a fifth stimulus package. They had already spent trillions of dollars in 4 other stimulus packages early in that year that were related to coronavirus. So they were negotiating a fifth. But you're in the fall, the year's winding down. It's also an election year. And as we were talking about in the last podcast, the question was not if we should do stimulus or not. The question was how much stimulus we should do. And the date on here, again, October 22nd. This is towards the end of October where Republicans in Congress are introducing a $500 billion stimulus. And Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are saying that the $500 billion stimulus is not enough. They actually introduced two, or tried to introduce this twice, and it was voted and killed by Democrats each time. This is in October. They killed the skinny stimulus, is what Mitch McConnell was calling it, scaled down version. Democrats wanted $2 trillion, and Republicans wanted $500 billion, about 25% of it. They tried to introduce this twice, once in October, another time in in September, and the Democrats killed it each time. Democrats reject, scale back $500 billion coronavirus. Now, again, the question was not if we should do it. The question was how much. And we talked about inflation in the last podcast. And inflation is when when there's too much currency being circulated, too much currency that is being created, and that drives up prices. So that's why Republicans were being fiscally responsible and trying to say, look, we don't need all this stimulus. That $500 billion should be enough, and then if we need more, we'll look at doing more down the line.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he will force a vote sometime this week on a GOP-led proposal. The Senate left town on recess weeks ago with no deal. Their version of the bill is expected to be around $500 billion. That is far less than what Democrats are hoping for. Top Democrats are already calling that initiative dead on arrival.
This bill will not pass. Go back to the drawing boards. Do a real bill. Speaker Pelosi and I are willing to meet you halfway, but not with this bill, which is not just skinny, but emaciated.
So one thing that I want to make clear that I don't think I was clear in the last podcast is that Trump actually agreed with Democrats that it was the Senate Republicans that were being fiscally responsible. And they were the ones that were saying, "Low, we don't need $2 trillion. We're not going to do $2 trillion." But Trump actually, when it came to the stimulus, he agreed with Democrats. He wanted a large stimulus. He wanted to send $2,000 to every American citizen. Now, if you look at what time this is and what time of year this is in September. So September, October. The election is in the beginning of November. So whatever you think Trump's motivations were, but this is just weeks before the election, he agreed with Democrats. He wanted $2,000 checks. He wanted a $2 trillion stimulus. He actually agreed with Democrats, but it was the Senate Republicans who were in charge, and Senate Republicans were being fiscally responsible. They were the ones that were saying, no, $500 billion is all that we want to do. So another thing that you need to understand is that Trump was already in October before the election. Well, date on this is September, but before the election in September, and it started to be talked about more even as you got into October. But why is September important? Again, as we explained in the last podcast, is because the fiscal year of the government starts October 1st. So the last day of the fiscal year is September 30th. So they were trying to get both of these deals done before the end of the fiscal year, which would have been October 1st. And they were trying to do them separately. But they were also the Trump administration was predicting that a vaccine was on the way. Now, we talked again in the last podcast that the vaccine, that they didn't announce that we had a vaccine until after the election. But the Trump administration was, they were forecasting that, look, if we don't have a vaccine before the election, it's going to be shortly after the election. So having a vaccine kind of adds to what the debate is going on in Congress about if we're going to need $2 trillion in stimulus or $500 billion, because the vaccine kind of signals that the pandemic is winding down. We have a vaccine. We just need to distribute it. So the speculation about a vaccine being imminent also had an impact on the debate that was going on in the Senate. But I want you to hear what the current presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris, was saying about the prospects of there being a vaccine before the election. Take a listen.
President Trump has said we can expect a COVID-19 vaccine before the end of the year, or, quote, sometime during the month of October. Vice presidential candidate Senator Kamala Harris said she's not so sure when it comes to trusting what the president said. Senator Harris said for her to take the vaccine, the information about its safety would have to come from a credible source.
So I want to play you exactly what she said, and this is Kamala Harris instilling doubt about the vaccine before the election. Before the election, she was instilling all of this doubt about the vaccine, but then after the election, her and the Biden administration went so far as to creating mandates for the vaccine. And the thing is about her and Biden creating these mandates for the vaccine after the fact is that the doubts that she expresses here before the election are the same doubts that any logical person would have had after the election. But it was okay for her to express these doubts before the election when Donald Trump was president of the United States. But when they came in power, it wasn't okay for you to express these doubts about the vaccine. It was mandated. You have to take the vaccine or you're going to lose your job.
So, as you know, President Trump has promised a coronavirus vaccine by the end of the year or maybe sooner. Would you trust that vaccine?
I think that we have learned since this pandemic started, but really before that, that there's very little that we can trust that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth. From the beginning of this pandemic, he has called it a hoax. He has muzzled the public health experts. He has minimized the seriousness of it.
Just lies.
False expectations for the American people and American families, even though if he had listened to the scientists and the experts, he would have understood the gravity of it and the power that he as president of the United States has to actually save lives. And none of those were his priorities. His priority was to do whatever he thought was politically expedient. And no, I would not trust his word. I would trust the word of public health experts and scientists, but not Donald Trump.
But do you trust that in the situation where we're in now, that the public health experts and the scientists will get the last word on the efficacy of a vaccine?
If past is prologue, that they will not. They'll be muzzled. They'll be suppressed. They will be sidelined because he's looking at an election coming up in less than 60 days, and he's grasping for whatever he can get to pretend that he has been a leader on this issue when he is not.
So let's just say there's a vaccine that is approved and even distributed before the election. Would you get it?
Well, I think that's going to be an issue for all of us. I will say that I would not trust Donald Trump, and it would have to be a credible source of information. That talks about the
and who determines what's credible or not? It has to be. It needs to be a credible source of information that determines the efficacy of the vaccine. Who determines if this person's credible or not?
Would not trust Donald Trump. And it would have to be a credible source of information that talks about the efficacy and the reliability of whatever he's talking about. I will not take his word for it. He wants us to inject bleach. No, I will not take his word.
So no, don't trust the vaccine if it comes out before the election. He wants us to inject bleach, which is a lie. I mean, this woman is such a liar. Most of what she says here in this interview is a lie. Most of what they talked about at the DNC over the last week were just lies on top of lies on top of lies. So they end up, again, we talked about this in the last podcast, passing a continuing resolution that pushed the debate into December, the end of the year. By this time, the election is over. Democrats, they know that it's a pretty good chance that Joe Biden is going to be president, even if we don't know the makeup of the Senate, because you still had those two Senate runoffs in Georgia. But they could, foresee that look, so what the Democrats did, they said that we'll negotiate for. So I wanted to make this clear too. Of this $2.3 trillion, 1.4 of this. Okay, so when we talked about them negotiating a fifth stimulus in September and in October, and the Democrats wanted a $2 trillion stimulus. And then Trump ends up signing this $2.3 trillion stimulus and budget omnibus. I made it seem like in the last podcast that the $2 trillion that Democrats wanted for stimulus was the $2.3 trillion or that Trump ended up signing. So let me just explain this slowly. Of this $2.3 trillion that Trump signed in December, 1.4 of it was the omnibus budget. 900 billion of it was stimulus. So 900 billion in stimulus is still 1,100 billion shy of the 2 trillion that Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Donald Trump wanted. Donald Trump wanted also the $2 trillion stimulus. So they only got 900 billion in the stimulus. So the other 1.4 of this 2.3 trillion is the omnibus. Now the omnibus, Nancy Pelosi loaded it with everything that she wanted, a wish list in this omnibus. Now, if they would have gotten the $2 trillion stimulus plus the $1.4 trillion omnibus, then you're talking about Trump in December signing both of those together, a $3.4 trillion package with the omnibus and with the stimulus. But they only got $900 in stimulus in December. So Democrats, what I'm trying to explain to you is that Democrats thinking that the election's over, Joe Biden's going to be coming in, we'll go ahead and settle on this $900 billion. But then when we come in January, we're going to do some more is what they were thinking. Trump, the reason that it took Trump a while, now Trump was upset about this bill. He was upset for two reasons. He was upset about the omnibus without line item veto power. When Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell send Donald Trump the stimulus and the omnibus together, then he has to sign it. He waited a little while because he was upset. And the reason that he was upset is because he didn't feel that the stimulus went far enough. And then he didn't like the omnibus as well. And the thing about the omnibus is that he couldn't veto the omnibus because if he's vetoing the omnibus, then he's also vetoing the stimulus. And then you're in Christmas time at the end of the year and the holidays, and little Timmy's not getting his stimmy. So they forced him to sign the omnibus by attaching it to the stimulus. So that was why he was upset. He was upset that the stimulus wasn't big enough. He wanted to send everybody $2,000. And the $2,000 came from Trump. That's why Joe Biden, when he started talking about the $2,000 to every American citizen when he came in, and that came from Trump. He stole that from Trump. Trump had been saying $2,000 per citizen going back to September before the election, and that's what Trump wanted. He wanted every American to get $2,000. The Republicans, being fiscally responsible, did not want to do that, so they ended up settling on the $900 billion, and then every citizen, instead of getting $2,000, they got $600. That's why when they do the American Rescue, when Joe Biden gets in, and he had been saying $2,000, and everybody's like, well, wait a minute, Joe, you said you were going to do $2,000, and you only did $1,400. Where's it at? Right down here, $1,400. Well, the reason Joe Biden only did $1,400 is because if you add the $1,400 in the American Rescue with the $600 that Trump did in December, then that $600 and the $1,400 equal to $2,000. So you essentially got the $2,000 over a 4-month period, but Trump gave you $600 and Joe Biden gave you $1,400. Wow, there's a lot here. I just want to clear this stuff up. So Trump was upset about the omnibus, and he was upset that the stimulus wasn't large enough. Without line item veto power, he had to accept the entire omnibus. So little Timmy gets his stimmy before the end of the year, and he ends up signing this $2.3 trillion package, which was $900 stimulus and $1.4 trillion omnibus budget. So this was the other Don Lemon clip that I said that I had earlier. What Don Lemon is doing now, what he is his content is going out and interviewing people. I mean, how the mighty have fallen. This guy was on primetime on CNN. Now he's running around with a microphone interviewing people at fast food joints. But this is a clip from another podcaster who does exactly what Don Lemon is doing here. He's a smaller guy, but he goes out and he interviews people, man on the streets. But I want you to listen to a little bit of this clip. This is Don Lemon interviewing this fast food worker about if you support Donald Trump or if you support Kamala Harris. Take a listen.
I say he gave us stimulus checks. Even though that was nothing, he didn't have to do that. He still blessed us with stimulus checks.
You know, he didn't do the stimulus checks. He didn't want to do it. That was a Democratic Congress. He only held it up.
So this guy, fast food worker, says that I like Trump. I like Trump because he gave us stimulus checks. Don Lemon is saying, no, Trump did not give you stimulus checks. It was a Democratic Congress. Yes, I mean, it was a Democratic House of Representatives, but a Republican Senate. They did it bipartisan. They agreed on $900 billion that sent you a $600 stimulus check before the end of the year. And Don Lemon's lying to this guy and said Trump didn't have anything to do with it.
To get his name on the check.
I did not know that.
Yeah, well, that's because that's basically BS. So Donald Trump was actually calling to increase the dollar amount on the stimulus checks. One, supporting Donald Trump because he gave you free money, this is not a good reason to support Donald Trump.
Absolutely.
But let's just put that aside. Don Lemon saying he had nothing to do with that. Donald Trump was the one that was calling for them to be increased from $600 to $2,000.
$2,000.
They passed the House. The Senate was Republican controlled. Don Lemon is a lying sack of crap. Let's move on.
So he just explained to you in a short way what I took a long path to explain to you is that Republicans agreed to $900 billion, which sent a $600 check. And then Joe Biden comes in and, I want to play this clip. This is a clip about Trump signing the $2.3 trillion bill, which included $900 billion stimulus, $1.4 trillion of the omnibus budget. This is a clip about Trump signing that. I want you to take a listen to this clip.
The president has indeed signed this legislation. So 5 days after making this threat, President Trump has signed this massive
threat. What was the threat? He had threatened to veto it. Why did he threaten to veto it? Well, he threatened to veto it for the two reasons that I told you. He didn't think the stimulus was big enough. He wanted to send everyone $2,000, and he didn't like the omnibus. He didn't like the fact they sent them to him together and forced him to pass the omnibus because they held the stimulus with the omnibus. That's why he threatened to veto.
Days after making this threat, President Trump has signed this massive spending bill, which includes $900 billion of coronavirus relief. But of course, we should note, Dana, that this only happened after the president allowed those unemployment benefits for more than an estimated 12 million Americans to lapse at midnight last night. While the president is signing this legislation, it is not without some pain for millions of Americans that has already occurred. But at the same time, perhaps millions of Americans can also begin to breathe a sigh of relief this evening, knowing that some help at least will be on the way.
Yeah, and Jeremy, I was just going to take it back from you to let you look down at your phone. I've been there before. I know what it's like to try to get news from sources while you're talking on TV. It's not easy. If anybody could do it, you can. I know. But this is big news, and it shouldn't be big news. It shouldn't be big news because this should have been signed the moment that the president got this legislation. And it's because his team was involved. His Treasury Secretary was a major negotiator in this bipartisan deal. Was it what the president wanted? No. Was it what Democrats wanted? No. Was it what his Republican colleagues on Capitol Hill wanted? No. That's why it's called compromise. It's not called I get everything I want. I mean, it's the art of legislating. And the fact is that what the president has been saying for the past several days on Twitter, that there needs to be a higher amount when it comes to the direct payment. What he just signed, what is now the law of the land, people will start to get, who qualify, $600 checks for individuals. He wanted it to be $2,000. Democrats wanted that all along. They were ready to try to call his bluff.
So Democrats and Republicans wanted the $2,000 check. The Republicans in the Senate were the ones that were being fiscally responsible. They ended up sending everyone $600. But as soon as Joe Biden and Kamala were sworn in, then Nancy Pelosi, still controlling the House of Representatives, Chuck Schumer controlling the Senate, says we're going to get what we want now. Now we're in charge. We're going to get everything that we want. So they ended up sending everyone another $1,400, which with the $600 included the $2,000. So that's how you got to $2,000. And then they got all their goodies. I mean, things that are not even related to COVID-19 were in this bill. And this was a article that I didn't share with you guys in the last podcast, but I wanted to share because I said that that Republicans in the Senate were trying to negotiate a smaller package when they did the American Rescue. And I said that it was 500 billion again, because remember back in August or in September and October when they were debating this and they were trying to come back with the skinny package, it was 500 billion. So after Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are already inaugurated and Democrats control both houses of Congress, they control the White House, they can push through whatever they want with Kamala Harris's 51st vote, then Republicans don't have any power at all. But they're still trying to negotiate because they want to do it bipartisan. All of the other, the argument they're making is all of the other stimulus packages that we have done related to COVID have been done bipartisan. They have been us working together and coming to a negotiation. So they had done already 5 stimulus packages from the beginning of COVID to this period of time in March of 2021. They'd already done 5 stimulus packages and they were all done bipartisan. This is the first one that is done without a single Republican vote. But Republicans wanted to negotiate with them, even though they had come to the agreement to do the $900 billion before the end of the year, and they thought that was enough. Now the Democrats have full power. We still want to come to the table and negotiate with you, and so we can do this bipartisan. That's not what they wanted to do.
The Biden administration is trying to urgently pass its top priority, a nearly $2 trillion plan to help millions of jobless and hungry Americans who just suffered through the worst economic year this nation has seen since the end of World War II. The plan includes $1,400 stimulus payments, enhanced unemployment assistance for small business, money for childcare and aid for states and schools, increased support for vaccines, and a $15 minimum wage increase.
But as a lot more than that.
Struggles with its own identity, the question is whether President Biden will be able to deliver on the compromise he promised the nation in his inaugural address just 11 days ago, or whether Democrats will plow ahead with the plan all by themselves.
Will they plow along? So what the Republicans were calling him on is a commitment that he had made in his inaugural address to be bipartisan, to work with Republicans. So they're saying now we're 11 days from your inauguration. Are you going to work with us so we can do this stimulus in a bipartisan manner, the way we had done all of the 5 other stimulus packages? Or are you guys just going to plow through and do it alone, is what Dana Bash says. Are you going to plow through and do it alone? And what's the Republicans were trying to negotiate a smaller package of $600 billion is what you see here. Instead of doing, again, back in September, they were saying, no, we don't want to do $2 trillion. We want to do $500 billion. And they end up doing $900 billion in negotiation. And then they come in and Democrats have total control, but they're calling them out and saying, look, you guys, are you committed to being bipartisan? And if you're committed to being bipartisan, then you need to negotiate with us. And we want to negotiate, and we want a compromise bill of $600 billion. Now, the question was not, should we do more stimulus or not? The question was how much more stimulus we should do. Take a listen.
Joining me now to discuss all of this is President Biden's top economic advisor, director of the National Economic Council, Brian Deese. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining me. I know you've seen this morning a group of 10 Republican senators led by Susan Collins, and it includes my next guest, Rob Portman, sent a letter to President Biden. It outlines a proposal for compromise, and in that they're requesting a meeting with President Biden to discuss it. Will that meeting happen?
We've received the letter, and we certainly will be reviewing it over the course of the day. What I will say is that the provisions of the president's plan, the American Rescue Plan, were calibrated to the economic crisis that we face. As you know, we just lived through the worst economic year since the demobilization in the wake of World War II. Just this week, 1 million more Americans filed claims for unemployment insurance. 30 million Americans reported they didn't have enough food to eat. We're in a unique crisis, and the elements of this plan really were designed and are designed to take on that crisis head on. How are we going to get shots in people's arms? How are we going to get schools reopened so parents can get back to work? And how are we going to provide that direct relief to those families and those businesses that are struggling the most?
That's a long way. That's a long way of saying that we're not negotiating at all. That we're in charge now, and we're moving full steam ahead with the $1.9 trillion that we want. You can screw your $600 billion is basically what the Biden administration was saying. This is Senator Portman. He was on this same show just after the Biden administration official. Take a listen.
And it's true that this morning we sent out a letter to the president saying we would love to work with him. It's signed by 10 Republicans. It specifies the proposal that we think is more targeted and more appropriate for the times we're in. And my hope is the president will meet with us and we'll be able to work out something that is bipartisan. We've done it 5 times. You know, we've had 5 COVID-19 packages that are entirely bipartisan. Let's do it again, because that's what would be best for the country.
So, Senator, I have the letter here. It does lay out general ideas, some specifics, but not a lot. Can you give us a ballpark of how much you're willing to spend in this whole package you're proposing?
$600 billion.
Well, it'll be less than 1.9 because much of what the administration has laid out has nothing to do with COVID-19.
Much of what is in this bill has nothing to do with COVID-19, is what Senator Portman says. Is that true? Is that true? This is Chuck Schumer today. This is today, Chuck Schumer. He tweeted this out. Just 2 years ago, after President Biden signed Inflation Reduction, this is related to the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm sorry. So anyway, I thought it was related to the 1.9 trillion, but there was tons of stuff that were in this bill that had nothing to do with COVID. The Inflation Reduction Act too, but in the American Rescue, there was tons of stuff that was not related to COVID, is what Senator Portman says here.
Good, you're proposing?
Well, it'll be less than 1.9 because much of what the administration has laid out has nothing to do with COVID-19. And in fact, some of it is not even responsive to the issues that Mr. Deese raised. As an example, with regard to the direct payments, we think they should be much more targeted. $50,000 cap for individuals, as an example, $100,000 for a family. And right now, if you look at the administration's plan, you could have a family with 3 kids making almost $300,000 a year getting a check. And many of these people have had no impact from COVID. In fact, some are doing quite well. Others are struggling. Let's focus on those who are struggling.
What is he saying? He's saying that instead of just passing $2 trillion and sending everyone a $1,400 check, why don't we means test it? Why don't we send it to the people who need the money instead of just passing all this money? Again, this is what caused the inflation, people. This is what caused the inflation. And Democrats did it by themselves. They refused to negotiate with Republicans. They refused to negotiate at all. And this was the first out of 6 COVID stimulus packages. This one for $2 trillion is the only one that was not done bipartisan. It was done with 51 votes because of Kamala Harris's vote. So, and Senator Warner came out and said that it was too big. Biden's $1.9 trillion pandemic relief package was too big. He voted for it. If you thought it was too big, Senator Warner, it only passed in the Senate with 50 votes, and the vice president, you could have killed it if you thought it was too big. But this is after the fact, after Republicans were trying to negotiate a smaller package of $600 billion and trying to negotiate with these guys and saying that, look, $1.9 trillion is too big. Then after they pass it and after it causes inflation, then even Democrats that voted for it came out and said, oh, it was too big now. It was too big. I had a lot more that I wanted to share with you guys. I wanted to get back into Larry Summers in this podcast and relate Larry Summers back to these guys, because Larry Summers worked for 2 of these administrations. 2 of these guys in these 24 years, Larry Summers, this guy who was predicting all of the inflation and calling the American Rescue the least responsible economic policy in 40 years, this guy worked for this guy, and he also worked for this guy. So when we get back into the podcast and we're going to pick this up, right? Because we're still talking about Kamala Harris and her economic proposal and her economic policies that she is talking about. And I'm going to relate it all back to that. But I'm not going to only relate what they inherited from the 4 years of Trump back to her economic policies. I'm going to relate the 28 years of the Bushes, Obamas, and the Clintons that preceded Trump to her economic policy. And we'll pick this back up. I'll get back into it on Friday or Monday. Today's Friday. You guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.